If you love stories like this, watch till the end, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment letting us know where you're listening from. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered under crystal chandeliers, and the elegant murmur of New York's high society filled every corner of the room. Claire adjusted the navy blue silk gown that tried, unsuccessfully, to hide the gentle curve of her 5-month pregnancy. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held a glass of orange juice, trying to look comfortable in a sea of familiar faces and rehearsed smiles. Richard Sterling, her husband, stood a few feet away, surrounded by businessmen and politicians who hung on his every word as if they were pearls of wisdom. Tall, with broad shoulders and an impeccable posture, Richard commanded the attention of any room he entered. His shipping and port logistics empire had made him one of New York City's most influential men, and he wore that power with the ease of someone born to it. Claire watched her husband from a distance, trying to decipher the man he had become in recent years. Where was the Richard who had won her over with handwritten poems and promises, whispered under a moonlit walk through Central Park? The man who smiled with his eyes and held her hand as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Now his eyes were as cold as steel, and his hands only touched her when there was an audience, turning affection into a calculated performance. Tonight's charity gala was for a foundation for underprivileged children, but Claire knew that for most of the guests, it was just another opportunity to show off jewelry, designer dresses, and political connections. She herself was there out of obligation, playing the part of the exemplary wife that Richard so valued in public. That's when she saw her. Chloe Davis swept into the ballroom like a gust of wind, her entire being vibrating with a provocative energy that made heads turn. The tight red dress highlighted every curve of her slender body, and her brown hair fell in perfect waves over her bare shoulders. She was in her early 20s, the age when beauty doesn't yet carry the weight of experience, and she used it as a weapon. Claire knew her. Everyone knew Chloe Davis, the socialite who appeared in the gossip columns with the frequency of someone whose contacts and ambitions far exceeded her modest bank account. The daughter of a bankrupt merchant, Chloe had learned early on that beauty and audacity could open doors that money no longer could. What Claire didn't expect was to see Chloe walking directly toward Richard. Her heart tightened as she watched the ease with which the young woman approached her husband, touching his arm with excessive familiarity, leaning in to whisper something in his ear that made him smile. A smile Claire hadn't seen in months, maybe years, a genuine, almost boyish smile that briefly lit up Richard's always controlled face. Claire's hands grew cold around her glass. She wasn't naive. In recent months, she had noticed the prolonged absences, the business meetings that stretched late into the night, the different perfume she sometimes smelled on his shirt. But seeing it, witnessing it with her own eyes, was different from imagining. It was as if every suspicion took on a body, a form, a palpable reality that physically ached in her chest. Richard slid his arm around Chloe's waist with a naturalness that cut Claire like a sharp blade. They chatted animatedly, and he leaned in to listen, to her as if her words were the most interesting in the world. His hand moved up slightly, caressing the young woman's exposed back in a gesture that left no doubt about the intimacy between them. Claire felt nausea rise in her throat. It wasn't just morning sickness. It was the humiliation of being there, 5 months pregnant with that man's child, while he made a point of publicly flaunting his mistress for all of New York's elite to see and comment on. A few people were already glancing discreetly in her direction, then at Richard and Chloe and back at her. The whispers began, that low, venomous buzz that spreads at social events when there's a scandal in the air. Claire felt the heat rise to her cheeks, not from her own shame, but from the grotesque situation she was in. She tried to walk toward one of the adjoining rooms. She needed air, space to breathe and process what she was seeing. But her steps faltered when Chloe, as if equipped with sensors specially calibrated to detect vulnerability, looked directly at her. The smile that formed on the young woman's red lips had no warmth. It was triumphant, almost cruel. Chloe said something to Richard, and they both looked in Claire's direction. He maintained a neutral expression, but made no move to step away from his mistress or come speak to his wife. Claire forced herself to keep walking, holding her head high even as she felt her legs tremble. She managed to reach the hallway leading to the restrooms, leaning briefly against the cold marble wall to regain her balance. That's when she heard the footsteps behind her. Chloe had followed her. Claire turned, meeting those brown eyes fixed on her with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. The young woman tilted her head, studying her as if she were a museum piece of no particular value. "You okay, honey?" Chloe's voice was syrupy sweet, as fake as a glass diamond. "You look a little pale. It must be tiring being pregnant at a party like this, isn't it?" Claire took a deep breath, searching for the strength within herself, not to show how much those words hurt. "I'm fine. Thank you for your concern." Her voice came out firmer than she expected. Chloe laughed, a sharp sound that echoed in the empty hallway. "Concern? Oh, sweetie, don't kid yourself. I just came over because I thought you should know a few things. After all, it's embarrassing to be the last to know, right?" "Know what?" Claire asked, even though she knew she didn't want to hear the answer. "That Richard and I have been together for almost a year, that he tells me things he's probably never told you, that he's tired of your victim act, always weepy, always needy." Chloe took a step forward, invading Claire's personal space. "He deserves someone who's his equal, someone who understands the needs of a powerful man. And frankly, you've never been that person." Each word was a carefully placed stab, chosen to inflict maximum damage. Claire felt tears burn her eyes, but refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give Chloe that satisfaction. "If he thinks that, why is he still with me? Why are we having a child?" Chloe smiled, and there was something sad in that smile, as if she were about to reveal a secret that would change everything. "Because men like Richard don't let go of their possessions, honey. You're part of his image, the family man reputation he's built, but love you? He never did. And now that you're having his child, you're even more trapped. It's convenient for him. As for me," she touched her own chest with a theatrical gesture, "I'm what he really wants. And between us," she moved even closer, whispering, "he promised me that as soon as the baby is born, things are going to change. You'll see." Claire felt the floor open up beneath her. It wasn't just Chloe's words, but the real possibility that Richard had said that, planned that her pregnancy was just another step in a pre-written script where she was a disposable supporting character. "You're lying." The words came out weak, without conviction. "Am I?" Chloe stepped back, her smile widening. "Then why is he out there in the ballroom touching me, practically kissing me, while you're in here, alone and pregnant? If I were you, I'd think carefully about your place in this story. Because, honey, you're not the main character. You never were." With that, Chloe spun on her high heels and started back toward the main ballroom. But before she disappeared, she turned one last time. "Oh, and Claire, you should be careful in your fragile state. It would be a shame if something happened to you or the baby. Accidents happen, especially when people insist on being where they're not welcome." The veiled threat hung in the air like toxic smoke. Claire stood frozen, unable to move, as she processed everything she had just heard. Her heart pounded erratically, and she placed her hands protectively over her belly, as if she could shield her unborn child from all that poison. When she finally gathered the courage to return to the ballroom, the atmosphere seemed different. Or maybe it was she who was different, seeing for the first time the truth that had always been there, but that she had refused to acknowledge. Richard was still next to Chloe, now talking to a group of businessmen. His hand rested casually on the small of her back, a gesture far too intimate to be innocent. Claire took a deep breath and walked toward them. She didn't know what she was going to do or say, but she couldn't just run away and let this continue. She had some dignity left, even if only in fragments. But before she could get close, a waitress hurried past carrying a tray of steaming coffee. "Cups." Chloe, seeing Claire approach, said something to Richard that made him turn briefly, and then in a move that seemed too calculated to be accidental, Chloe bumped into the waitress. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The tray tilted, and one of the cups of scalding coffee flew through the air, the dark liquid forming a perfect arc before hitting Claire squarely in the lap, soaking her dress and burning her exposed skin. The scream that tore from her throat was primal, one of pure visceral pain. The coffee was scorching and she felt her skin burn, blisters forming instantly where the liquid had hit. Her legs gave out and she fell to her knees on the polished marble floor, her hands trying uselessly to pull the wet fabric away from her flaming skin. The entire ballroom fell silent for an eternal moment. Then it erupted in exclamations of shock and horror. People rushed toward her, but Claire could barely see them through the tears of pain blurring her vision. Richard was there, finally, kneeling beside her. But there was no genuine concern in his eyes. There was irritation, embarrassment, the expression of someone whose perfect evening had just been ruined by an inconvenient incident. "It was an accident," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The waitress tripped. It was nobody's fault." Claire looked at him through the haze of pain and saw the crystal-clear truth. He was protecting Chloe. Even now, with her burned and moaning in pain on the floor, he chose his mistress. And it was in that moment, as the physical pain mixed with the emotional pain in an indistinguishable agony, that Claire understood her life as she knew it was over. That the man beside her was not her protector, but another source of her suffering, and that she would have to find within herself a strength she didn't even know she possessed to survive what was to come. Someone shouted to call an ambulance. Others were taking pictures and filming with their phones, recording her humiliation for digital posterity. And through it all, Claire kept her eyes fixed on Richard, memorizing that moment, that cold, calculating expression that revealed who he truly was. She didn't know it yet, but this would be the last time she would let herself be a victim of his cruelty. The room began to spin, and Claire felt her consciousness slipping away. The last thing she saw before everything went dark was Chloe, standing a few feet behind Richard, with that same triumphant smile on her lips. Claire opened her eyes to the unforgiving white of the hospital ceiling. The throbbing pain in her lap and legs brought her back to reality with surgical cruelty. She tried to move, but every small adjustment sent waves of agony through her body. The burns had been treated, carefully bandaged, but her skin screamed beneath the dressings. The first thing she sought was the curve of her belly. Her hands, also lightly bandaged, went immediately to her womb, searching for a sign, a movement. The baby. She had to know about the baby. A nurse entered the room, smiling with the professional kindness that medical staff learn to cultivate. "You're awake, good. How are you feeling?" "My baby," Claire managed to whisper, her throat dry and raw. "Is the baby okay?" "Yes, honey. The doctor checked you as soon as you arrived. The baby wasn't affected. The heartbeat is normal. You were lucky. The burns were serious but superficial. They'll hurt for a while, but they'll heal." Lucky. The word echoed bitterly in Claire's mind. What kind of luck was it to be intentionally burned by her husband's mistress in a room full of people? What kind of luck was it to be lying in a hospital bed, alone, while the father of her child was probably still at the gala, doing damage control for his precious reputation? "Where is my husband?" she asked, even though she didn't really want the answer. The nurse hesitated, and that pause said more than words ever could. "He came in the ambulance, stayed for a few minutes while you were being examined, and then said he had to take care of some things. He left his number in case we needed anything." Of course he did. Richard was always efficient at maintaining a minimally acceptable appearance. The nurse finished checking Claire's vitals and left, leaving her alone with her thoughts and her pain. She looked out the window, seeing the New York skyline begin to brighten with the first light of dawn. She had been here all night, unconscious or asleep under medication, and the world outside kept spinning as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something Claire knew could not be undone or forgotten. She closed her eyes, trying to organize the thoughts tumbling through her mind. She needed to think, to plan, to decide what to do. But before she could begin to process anything, the door opened again. Richard walked in, impeccable as always in his dark suit, but there were signs of fatigue on his face. He hadn't slept, that much was obvious. He had probably spent the night managing the situation, controlling the narrative, ensuring his version of events would be the one that prevailed. Claire. He approached the bed but didn't touch her. He kept his hands in his pockets, that executive posture he used when he needed to maintain total control of a situation. "How are you feeling?" How do you think I'm feeling, Richard? The words came out sharper than she intended, but she didn't regret them. He sighed, that weary sigh of someone dealing with a difficult person. It was an accident, Claire. A fluke. The waitress tripped. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time. It wasn't an accident. Claire stared directly at him, searching his eyes for any sign that he knew the truth, too. But all she found was that calculated coldness she knew so well. Chloe did it on purpose. She threatened me minutes before, Richard. She told me to be careful because accidents happen. You're delirious. The medication is affecting your perception. Chloe would have no reason to do something like that. No reason. Claire felt anger begin to boil inside her, momentarily overpowering the physical pain. She'd have no reason to want to humiliate me, to hurt me, maybe even cause me to lose our child. She, your mistress, who you paraded in front of all of New York society. Last night, as if I wasn't there, as if I didn't matter. Richard clenched his jaw, that muscle twitching as it always did when he was containing his anger. Watch what you say, Claire. You're upset, confused. You don't want to make accusations you can't prove. I don't need to prove anything. I know what I saw, what I felt, what she said to me. And you know it too. You just choose to protect her instead of protecting me and your child. For a moment, something flickered across Richard's face. Maybe guilt, maybe remorse, but it was so fleeting. Claire could have imagined it. When he spoke again, his voice was cold and pragmatic. Look, Claire, let's be practical. What happened last night was captured by dozens of cell phone cameras. The video is already circulating on social media. My PR team is working to control the damage, but we need a coherent narrative. And that narrative is that it was an unfortunate accident, nothing more. Narrative. She repeated the word with disdain. It's always about the narrative for you, isn't it, Richard? About how things look, not how they really are. It's about protecting our family, our reputation, our future. He moved closer, finally sitting in the chair beside the bed. Listen, I know things haven't been easy between us. I know I've been distant, that maybe I haven't been the husband you deserved. But we're still a family. You, me, and this baby. And families protect each other. Claire wanted to believe those words. She wanted so badly to go back in time, to when Richard truly loved her, when his promises meant something. But the woman who had been burned last night was no longer the same one who had walked into that gala. And what are you proposing, Richard? That you confirm it was an accident, that you tell the press if they ask that there's no animosity, that it was just an unlucky moment. In return, I'll ensure that you and the baby have everything you'll ever need. A comfortable home, financial security, the best medical care. You won't have to worry about a thing. Accept my dignity. Accept the truth. Richard leaned forward, and for the first time since he'd entered the room, he touched her hand. The touch was calculated, gentle enough to seem sincere, but cold enough to reveal its true nature. Dignity doesn't pay the bills, Claire. The truth doesn't secure our child's future. Be reasonable. Do you really want to drag our family through a public scandal? Do you want our child to grow up in the shadow of a war between his parents? The manipulation was subtle but effective. Claire felt herself waver, the temptation to take the easy way out, to simply agree and let Richard handle everything as he always did. It would be so much simpler, less painful, less terrifying. I need to think. Her voice came out weak, uncertain. Richard nodded, satisfied that he had planted the seed of doubt. Of course. You need to rest to recover. We'll talk more when you're feeling better. He stood up, smoothing his suit. For now, stick to that version when people talk to you. Accident, nothing more. He turned to leave, but paused at the door, looking over his shoulder. Oh, and Claire, it's better if you don't speak to the press without my PR team present. They have a way of twisting things, you know how it is. We wouldn't want you to say something you'll regret later. The veiled threat hung in the air long after he was gone. Claire was alone again, but now with the weight of a decision that could change the course of her life. She could accept Richard's offer, live comfortably in a lie, raise her child in a home where the father chose another woman but kept up appearances, or she could tell the truth and face the consequences, whatever they might be. She was still pondering these options when the door opened once more, and Claire braced herself for another visit from Richard. But the person who entered was completely different. Lucas, her older brother, dressed in his US Navy uniform, crossed the room in 2 long strides and wrapped her in a careful hug, mindful of her bandages and injuries. Claire didn't realize how much she'd been holding in until she felt the tears finally fall, soaking the shoulder of Lucas's uniform. "I came as soon as I heard," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I saw the video, Claire. Everyone saw it, and I know it wasn't an accident." Lucas had always been able to read his sister like no one else. Since they were kids, whenever she tried to hide a scraped knee or a sad heart, he always found out. And now, looking into his green eyes so much like her own, Claire saw something she hadn't seen in a long time, someone who truly cared about how she was feeling. "He asked me to lie," she whispered. "Richard wants me to say it was an accident, that I should keep quiet and accept his deal." Lucas pulled back just enough to look her in the eye. "And what do you want to do?" "I want," Claire began, but hesitated. What did she want? Justice? Revenge? To just be seen, be heard, be treated like a person and not a convenient accessory in Richard's life? "I want someone to pay for what they did to me. I want Richard to take responsibility. I want Chloe to face consequences. But I'm scared, Lucas. I'm scared of being alone in this, of not having the strength to see it through." Lucas took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You're not alone. You never have been. And as for strength, you have more than you know. You always have." He paused, considering his next words. "I know someone who can help. A lawyer who works on cases just like this. She specializes in domestic and psychological abuse. If you want to fight this, she can guide you." Claire looked at her brother, seeing the determination in his face, feeling the unconditional support he offered. And there, in that hospital room with her body aching and her heart broken, she made a decision that would change everything. "I want to meet her. I want to fight." Lucas smiled, a smile of pride and brotherly love. "I'll call her right now. Helen Carter. She's good, Claire, very good. And she'll be in your corner until the very end." As Lucas stepped out to make the call, Claire looked out the window again. The sun was fully up now, bathing New York City in a golden light. A new day, a new beginning. She didn't know yet that this decision would trigger a series of events that would expose not only Richard and Chloe, but a whole network of manipulation and lies that existed far beyond what she imagined. She didn't know that her act of courage would inspire other women to speak out about their own abuse. She didn't know she would become a symbol of a fight much bigger than herself. But she knew in that moment that she would no longer be a victim, that she had value, that she deserved justice, and that, with the help of those who truly cared for her, she would find the strength to reclaim her dignity, even if it cost her everything she had built with Richard. The door opened again and Lucas returned, followed by a middle-aged woman with short, greying hair and sharp eyes behind square-framed glasses. She wore a grey pantsuit and carried a leather briefcase under her arm. There was something solid about her, something trustworthy, that made Claire breathe a little easier. "Claire, this is Helen Carter. Helen, my sister." Helen approached with a kind but professional smile, extending her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Claire, though I wish it were under better circumstances. Your brother briefly told me what happened. If you're willing, I'd like you to tell me everything, from the beginning, and then we'll figure out, together, what your options are and the best path forward." Claire shook the offered hand, feeling for the first time since last night that maybe, just maybe, all was not lost. That, maybe there was a path that didn't lead through submission or silence. "Please pull up a chair, Miss Carter. I have a lot to tell you." For the next 3 days, Claire's hospital room transformed into a command center. Helen Carter came every morning, bringing documents, taking meticulous notes, and recording depositions with legal authorization. Lucas remained a silent guardian, making sure no one unauthorized got near his sister. The video of the incident had gone explosively viral. It already had over 5 million views, and the comments were split between support for Claire and various conspiracy theories. The press had camped out at the hospital entrance, demanding statements, searching for any scrap of information they could turn into a headline. Richard had tried to visit twice more, but Lucas had blocked him both times. The tension between the two men was palpable, and Claire knew it was only a matter of time before it erupted into a direct confrontation. What she didn't expect was a visit from Trevor Morgan. Trevor was Richard's friend from their college days, a successful corporate lawyer who was a regular at their home. Claire had always found him kind and considerate, someone who seemed to genuinely care about the couple's well-being. So when he appeared at her door with flowers and a worried smile, she asked Lucas to let him in. "Claire, it's so good to see you're doing better." Trevor placed the flowers in a vase and pulled a chair close to the bed. "I was shocked when I saw the video. Absolutely shocked. How are you feeling?" "I'm recovering," she answered cautiously. Helen had instructed her to be careful about what she said to anyone connected to Richard. Trevor shook his head, looking genuinely dismayed. "It's a terrible situation, and I see your family is being very protective, which is understandable." He hesitated, as if weighing his next words. "Can I be frank with you, Claire? Please." "Richard is panicking. Not on the outside. You know how he is, always in control. But inside, he's terrified. His reputation is on the line, his businesses are being affected, and he knows he made some serious mistakes." Trevor leaned forward, lowering his voice. "He asked me to talk to you, to try to make you understand his position." Claire felt a pang of disappointment. So this wasn't a friendly visit, but a diplomatic mission. "And what is his position, Trevor?" "That this is all being blown out of proportion. That yes, he had a moment of weakness with Chloe, but that you are his wife, the mother of his child, and that's what really matters. He wants to resolve this within the family, without getting courts and lawyers involved. He wants you to get through this together." Claire laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the room. "Resolve it within the family. He wanted me to lie about how I got burned. He wanted me to stay quiet while he continues with his mistress. What kind of family is that, Trevor?" "He ended things with Chloe," Trevor said quickly. "As soon as you were hospitalized, he cut all ties with her. He's sorry, Claire. Deeply sorry." She studied him, looking for signs of a lie. But Trevor seemed sincere, his eyes conveying genuine concern. Still, something didn't quite add up. "If he's so sorry, why doesn't he come and tell me that himself? Why send you?" "Because he knows you wouldn't listen to him right now, that you're too hurt, and rightly so. But he asked me to make it clear that he wants to fight for your marriage, that he's willing to go to therapy, to change, to be the husband you deserve. He just needs you to give him a chance." Claire felt the temptation of hope. What if Richard really did change? What if this nightmare could turn into a new beginning? She touched her belly, thinking of the baby who would soon be born. Wouldn't it be better for the child to have a united family? Helen had warned her about this, about how abusers often promise to change, especially when they face real consequences, about how the pattern repeats. Abuse, remorse, promises, a temporary honeymoon phase, and then the cycle begins again. "I need to think," she said finally. Trevor smiled, relieved. Of course, no pressure. Just consider that maybe the path of reconciliation is better for everyone, less painful, less destructive." He stood up, preparing to leave. "And Claire, if you need someone to talk to, someone neutral, I'm here. I've always been a friend to you both, and I just want what's best for you." After he left, Lucas came in immediately. "I don't trust him." "Why?" Claire asked, surprised. "Trevor has always been kind. To us?" "Exactly, too kind. And it's very convenient that he shows up now just when Richard is under pressure, bringing messages of remorse and change." Lucas crossed his arms. "I had a friend of mine do some quiet digging. Trevor had lunch with Richard yesterday. For 3 hours. That's not the behavior of someone who's being neutral, Claire. That's the behavior of someone who's coordinating a strategy." Claire's stomach sank. She had almost believed Trevor, almost let herself be carried away by the possibility of a happy ending. But Lucas was right. She was being manipulated again. The door opened, and Helen walked in carrying a stack of documents and a serious expression. "I have news," she said, sitting down and arranging the papers. "I've secured statements from 3 waiters who were near the incident. They all confirm they saw Chloe deliberately bump into the waitress. One of them even heard her say something like, 'Now you'll learn,' right before she did it." Claire felt a wave of validation. She wasn't crazy. She hadn't imagined it. "But there's more," Helen continued. "I looked into Chloe Davis's background. She has a pattern. In the last 5 years, she's been involved with at least 4 successful married men. In every case, there was some kind of confrontation with the wives. In one case, the wife was pushed at a party. In another, her car tires were repeatedly slashed. Nothing that could be definitively pinned on her, but the pattern is clear." "She's a predator," Lucas said, his voice hard. "She's someone who uses the tools she has to get what she wants," Helen corrected. "And what she wants, apparently, is social climbing and financial security, whatever the cost." She paused. "But here's the most interesting part. Chloe has a very expensive lawyer. Very. The kind of lawyer she shouldn't be able to afford on what she makes as a social media influencer. So where is the money coming from?" "From Richard?" Nausea churned in Claire's stomach. "Possibly. I'm looking into it. But that raises another question. If Richard is funding her defense, his narrative that he broke up with her doesn't hold up." "Trevor was here," Claire said suddenly, "saying Richard wants to reconcile, that he ended it with Chloe, that he's sorry." Helen and Lucas exchanged a look. "And you believed him?" Helen asked gently. "For a moment, yes," Claire admitted, feeling ashamed. "I wanted to believe him. It would be so much easier." Helen took her hand. "Claire, look at me. What's happening here isn't about what's easier. It's about what's right, about justice. You were deliberately assaulted by someone who wanted to hurt you, and your husband chose to protect that person instead of you. That's not something you fix with couples therapy and empty promises." "I know," Claire whispered. "Deep down, I know. But I'm scared. Scared of what comes next, of the public judgment, of raising my child alone." "You won't be alone," Lucas said firmly. "I'm here. Helen is here. And when your story truly goes public, when people understand what really happened, you'll have the support of thousands of women who have gone through or are going through the same thing." Helen nodded. "In fact, I've already received messages from 3 other women who were also victims of Richard in past relationships. He has a history of psychological abuse and control. They're willing to testify if needed." Claire felt something solidify inside her. Anger. Not the explosive, destructive kind, but the cold, determined anger that drives real change. "What do I need to do?" Helen smiled. "First, we're going to do an interview. A controlled one in a safe environment. You'll tell your side of the story calmly and clearly. We'll record it and release it through trusted channels. Then, we'll file a formal lawsuit against Chloe for assault and against Richard for negligence and psychological abuse. And we'll fight this to the end." "When?" "You're being discharged tomorrow. How about we do the interview in 2 days? That gives you time to recover a bit more, to gather your thoughts." Claire took a deep breath. "Okay, let's do it." That night, alone in her room after Lucas and Helen had left, Claire received a text from an unknown number. It was a video. With trembling hands, she pressed play. It was security footage from a luxurious office. Richard was sitting behind a massive desk, and across from him were Trevor and another man Claire didn't recognize. "We need to discredit any witness she might have." Richard's voice was clear on the recording. "Trevor, you'll keep getting close to her, gain her trust. When the time is right, you suggest that she's emotionally unstable because of the pregnancy, that she's seeing things that aren't there. And if she doesn't back down," Trevor's voice, "then we use Plan B." Richard leaned forward. "I have contacts in the press. We can plant stories about a troubled past, question her sanity. If we have to, we'll fight for custody of the baby when it's born, claiming she's psychologically unfit." Claire felt bile rise in her throat. Trevor, the friend she had almost trusted, the person who had pretended to care. It was all part of a calculated plan to destroy her if she didn't submit. Who had sent this video and why? She looked at the unknown number, but there was no additional message, no explanation. It didn't matter. What mattered was that now she had proof. Proof that Richard wasn't sorry, didn't want to reconcile. He just wanted to control the narrative and protect his empire, even if it meant destroying the mother of his child. Claire immediately forwarded the video to Helen with a single message. "We need to move this up. I can't wait 2 days. I want to do the interview tomorrow." Helen's reply came quickly. "Received, I'll arrange it. Are you ready for this?" Claire looked at her own reflection in the dark screen of her phone. She saw a woman she didn't fully recognize, someone stronger, more determined than the person who had walked into that gala days ago. "I'm more than ready. It's time Richard Sterling found out he severely underestimated the woman he married." She hit send and lay back in bed, feeling for the first time in days a sense of clear purpose. Tomorrow she would start fighting for real, and she wouldn't stop until justice was served. Outside, New York City slept under a starry sky, unaware that in the coming hours, a story that would shake the entire city was about to explode. A story of courage, of resistance, of a woman who decided her voice mattered more than the comfort of silence. And somewhere in that same city, the person who sent the video watched and waited, ready to reveal even more secrets when the time was right. Someone who knew Richard Sterling better than he knew himself, and who had their own reasons for wanting to see him fall. The room where the interview was being filmed was modest but welcoming, located at the headquarters of a non-profit organization that supported victims of domestic violence. Helen had carefully chosen both the location and the journalist who would conduct the conversation, Fiona Adams, known for her sensitive and investigative work on social issues. Claire sat in a comfortable armchair, with Lucas standing discreetly in the background and Helen by her side. Her burns were still bandaged, a visual reminder of the violence she had endured. She had chosen a simple, elegant dress in a light blue shade, nothing ostentatious, nothing that would distract from her words. When the cameras started rolling, Claire felt a moment of panic. Once she spoke, there would be no going back. Richard would use all his power to retaliate. But then she remembered the video she had received, his words planning her destruction, and her determination returned. Fiona began with gentle questions, establishing context. Claire spoke about her relationship with Richard, how he had changed over time, becoming cold and controlling. She described the humiliation at the gala, the encounter with Chloe, the veiled threat, and finally the moment the scalding coffee hit her. "It was not an accident," she said, looking directly into the camera. "Chloe Davis deliberately assaulted me, and my husband chose to protect her instead of me. He chose his reputation over my safety and the safety of our child." The interview lasted 40 minutes. When it was over, Claire felt both exhausted and relieved. She had spoken her truth. Now all that was left was to wait for the consequences. They didn't take long. The interview aired that same evening on a major New York news channel. Within hours, it was being shared millions of times on social media. The public response was overwhelmingly in Claire's favor. Women from all over the country began sharing their own stories of abuse and control using a hashtag that emerged spontaneously. "Believe her now." Richard tried to counter with his own public statement, claiming Claire was emotionally unstable due to her pregnancy, that she was distorting the facts. But the strategy backfired spectacularly when Helen released the video Claire had received, showing Richard and Trevor planning that exact line of defense. The fallout was immediate. Trevor Morgan's career as a corporate lawyer crumbled in a matter of days. Major companies cancelled contracts with Richard, not wanting to associate their brands with someone accused of abuse. The stock of his companies plummeted. Chloe, for her part, also tried to defend herself, claiming to be the victim of a smear campaign. But when Helen presented the witness statements and the history of similar behavior with other married men, her story began to fall apart. The district attorney's office decided to press criminal charges against Chloe for felony assault. Against Richard, Helen had filed for divorce and a restraining order, as well as a lawsuit for emotional distress. But it was Chloe's criminal trial that became the epicenter of public attention. 3 months later, the New York State Supreme Court was surrounded by protesters, journalists, and curious onlookers. Claire, now 8 months pregnant, entered the courthouse flanked by Lucas and Helen. She wore a simple dress, the scars from the burns still visible on her legs, though they had healed. Richard was there, sitting on the opposite side of the room, avoiding her gaze. Chloe sat between her lawyers, trying to maintain a confident expression, but the tension was visible in every line of her face. The trial began with the usual proceedings. The prosecution presented the evidence, the cell phone videos of the incident, the witness testimonies, Chloe's history. The defense tried to argue it was an accident, that Chloe had accidentally bumped into the waitress, that there was no intent to harm. Claire testified, recounting with a firm but emotional voice everything that had happened. When she showed the scars to the jury, several of the jurors were visibly moved. Chloe's lawyer tried to discredit her during cross-examination, suggesting she was exaggerating out of jealousy, that she wanted revenge on her husband's mistress. But Claire held her ground, answering every question with calm clarity. It was on the third day of the trial that everything changed. Helen had mentioned she had a surprise witness, but hadn't revealed who it was. When the judge authorized the witness to enter the courtroom, a murmur swept through the room. It was a woman in her early 40s, elegantly dressed with dark hair pulled back in a bun. She walked to the witness stand with steady steps, swore to tell the truth, and then looked directly at Richard. His face went pale. He clearly recognized her. "Please state your name for the court," the prosecutor asked. "My name is Isabel Norton, and I was married to Richard Sterling 10 years ago." The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel, demanding silence. Claire looked at Helen in shock, who maintained a neutral but satisfied expression. Isabel continued, "I came here because when I saw what happened to Claire, I recognized a pattern I lived through myself during the 5 years I was married to Richard." She paused, taking a deep breath. "Richard is a master of psychological control, of making you feel like you're crazy, that you're overreacting, that everything is your fault. During our marriage, he had several mistresses, and when I questioned him, he'd say I was paranoid, that they were just business relationships." Chloe's defense tried to object, claiming this wasn't relevant to the case at hand, but the prosecutor argued that it established a pattern of behavior, and the judge allowed Isabel to continue. "There was an incident," Isabel said, her voice trembling slightly now. "At a business dinner, one of his mistresses confronted me. She was drunk, aggressive. I tried to walk away, but she shoved me against a table. I broke my wrist in the fall. Richard saw the whole thing and didn't lift a finger to help me. Afterward, he tried to convince me that I had tripped on my own, that I was being dramatic." "And why didn't you report it at the time?" the prosecutor asked. "Because I was afraid. Because he controlled all our money, our social circles. Because he made me believe no one would take my word against his." Isabel looked directly at Claire. "But when I saw this brave woman stand up and speak her truth, I knew I had to do the same. I had to testify that Richard Sterling has a history of allowing, and even encouraging, his mistresses to attack his wives." Claire felt tears stream down her face. She wasn't alone. She never had been. There were other women who understood, who had been through the same hell. But Isabel wasn't finished. She opened her purse and took out an envelope. "And I brought something else. This is a recording of a conversation between Richard and Chloe, made 2 weeks before the gala. I gave it to the prosecution this morning. They've already verified its authenticity." The prosecutor took the envelope and, with the judge's permission, played the audio in the courtroom. Richard's voice was unmistakable. "Claire is becoming a problem. She questions too much, complains too much. I need a way to make her understand her place." And Chloe's voice replied, "Leave it to me. I'll find a way to humiliate her so badly she won't have the guts to challenge you again. Trust me." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard was as white as a sheet, his lawyers whispering furiously among themselves. Chloe had started to cry, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic at being exposed. The judge called a recess. When the session resumed 2 hours later, Chloe's defense had completely changed its strategy. They now claimed she had been manipulated by Richard, that she was in love and had followed his instructions without thinking of the consequences. But the damage was done. The recording proved premeditation, proved that the attack on Claire had been planned. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous: guilty. Chloe was sentenced to 4 years in prison for felony assault, in addition to having to pay substantial financial compensation to Claire. As for Richard, Although he wasn't on trial criminally at that moment, the recording was enough for the DA's office to open an investigation for conspiracy to commit assault. Furthermore, Claire's divorce was quickly finalized, with her receiving a significant portion of the couple's assets and generous alimony. But Claire's real victory wasn't financial. A month after the trial, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl she named Sophie. Lucas was in the delivery room, holding her hand. Helen was one of the first visitors at the hospital, bringing a bouquet of flowers and a proud smile. Richard asked to see his daughter, but Claire refused until he complied with all the requirements of the restraining order and began proven psychological treatment. Not for revenge, but because she wanted to ensure Sophie would grow up in a safe environment. In the months that followed, Claire became an active voice in the movement against domestic violence. She started giving talks, sharing her story, and supporting other women who were going through what she had lived. Isabel became a close friend, and together they founded an organization to help victims of psychological abuse. The identity of the person who sent the first video to Claire was never fully revealed, though Helen suspected it was someone from inside Richard's company, someone who had witnessed the abuse for too long and decided it was time to act. Richard lost control of several of his companies, was investigated for unethical business practices, and saw his carefully constructed empire crumble. Trevor was suspended from the Bar Association for unethical conduct. Chloe, serving her sentence, eventually gave several interviews about how ambition and desperation led her to make terrible choices. She became, ironically, an example of what not to do, participating in rehabilitation programs and speaking about manipulation and personal responsibility. But this story doesn't end with revenge or destruction. It ends with rebuilding. It ends with Claire, 18 months after that fateful gala, sitting in her new home in Brooklyn Heights, holding Sophie in her lap as the little girl plays with colorful blocks. Lucas visits them every week, a devoted uncle who helps in any way he can. Helen remains not just a lawyer, but a true friend. Claire looks out the window at the New York skyline spreading out before her, the city that witnessed her fall and her rise. She feels different from the woman who walked into that ballroom so long ago. Stronger, wiser, more whole. Sophie laughs, and the sound is the purest thing Claire has ever heard. It was for her that she fought, for her and for all the little girls who will grow up knowing they have a voice, that they have value, that they don't have to accept a love that hurts or a respect that humiliates. Her phone buzzes. It's a message from a woman who saw one of her talks and is gathering the courage to leave an abusive relationship. Claire replies with words of encouragement and offers resources from the organization she founded. Every woman she helps is a victory. Every story that inspires change is a small revolution. Richard eventually sought treatment forced by circumstances and the possibility of never having a relationship with his daughter if he didn't change. His path would be long if it was successful at all. Claire was no longer invested in that journey. She had built a new life, where he was just her daughter's father, nothing more. Chloe had 3 years of her sentence left to serve, and the time in prison was changing her, though it was too soon to tell if the change would be lasting. But Claire had learned that she couldn't control other people's journeys, only her own, and her journey had taken her from darkness to light, from submission to autonomy, from silence to a voice that echoed and inspired. When she puts Sophie to bed that night, she sings a lullaby her mother used to sing to her. She silently promises her daughter that she will grow up knowing her worth, knowing her rights, understanding that true love never hurts, never diminishes, never controls. And as the city falls asleep outside, Claire closes her eyes and sleeps peacefully for the first time in years. Because finally, she is free.